So I want to speak about. So my name is Nazir Sunday, and I wanted to. And I'm a farmer in the Philippine horticulture area. The Philippine horticulture area is situated within the urban edge of the city of Cape Town. It's a 3,000-acre farming area. It produces 40% of the city's vegetables, but also is now going to be supplying the city with water as well. So I'm from that area, and I'll show you guys a little map a little later on. Um, so I want to talk about reimagining the role of small-scale farmers and peri-urban land to achieve social justice and environmental justice uh, and climate resilience. And I think the role of small-scale farmers and peri-urban land is key to address restitution and social justice, but because you cannot hope to achieve this without restitution and justice for the environment. This is what Cheryl was talking about. We have to think about the environment in which we are working in, because we have a huge problem with that. So why is our environment in particular affected? Colonialism and apartheid resulted in the great clearing of black people from the soil, of the organic development of black farmers, of local indigenous food and farming systems, and this was followed by the imposition of a synthetic and exploitative relationship to the soil through the colonial capitalist food and farming regime that followed. The UN declared our soils to be very degraded, right? And this is because of land use. The Karoo is part of that big issue of degraded soils. And degraded soils and biodiversity loss means less clean water, more pollution, fewer resources, unhealthy food, and social disintegration. To tackle this, we need to heal people and soil simultaneously by reconnecting all of our society to the soil in two ways I'm suggesting. One is to connect small-scale farmers to the soil in urban and peri-urban areas of cities and towns. And here the 2015 Western Cape government Green Agri policy is instructive. It says that, and I quote, in an urbanizing province, the optimal use of high potential agricultural land in close proximity to cities and towns is critical to the resilience of food systems under conditions of climate change, unquote. Secondly, we need to connect all of society to the soil with locally grown food through local markets. But who are these black farmers, right? A PLAS study showed that there are over 2 million black farmers who are subsistence farmers, but buy most of their food at the supermarkets, right? And then there are 200,000 black small-scale farmers who are market-orientated and supply informal and formal markets. So we have the human resources, right? It's right there. We don't have to create them. According to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, globally small-scale farmers have access to only 25% of the world's arable land, but feed 70% of the world's people. In Africa, 70% of food is produced by small-scale farmers. You won't know this because we're living in South Africa and because of our history, right? In the PHF example of small-scale farming, if you compare small-scale farming job opportunities, the industrial farms in our area creates 2 jobs per hectare. While in our 1-hectare farm, we are on track to demonstrate that the farm can support 4 livelihoods with additional 2 salary jobs on 1 hectare. And if we have the appropriate infrastructure support, which we are denied by our government because they don't believe in small-scale farming, we could reach our target within 3 years as a small farm startup. Within 3 years. At the moment, what you have is land reform projects which are recapitalized every 5 years, just to keep these guys on a drip system of grants, right? So we need to transition from the hangover of the colonial agriculture to regenerative agriculture, where farmers have a more holistic approach to farming. And these principles are well established now. I know, for example, there are big white farmers out of this area that arrange trips to the US to learn about regenerative farming on farms of Gabe Brown, for example, right? Yet we have the knowledge right here at home. But I would say that regenerative agriculture can be better understood in a decolonial sense as land culture, where it is a product of local indigenous cultures that are deeply connected to particular places where farmers consider themselves as much of the part of the land as the land is a part of them. So regional agriculture has a history rooted in indigenous and local practices. It's not new. And then to turn to the value of peri-urban land in cities and towns, the value of peri-urban land is more than just about food production. It's also about recycling nutrients and system services. For example, organic waste can be redirected from landfill to the soil as compost. We estimate in the PHA, if all of the PHA switches to regenerative agriculture, we'll probably consume 1.5 million tons of organic waste as compost into the soil every year. And we have a huge problem that the city and the province has an issue about what to do with the organic waste. It's ending in landfill and it's creating a huge environmental problem for us. And if we add regenerative agricultural principles, agriculture could combat climate change by sinking 30% of atmospheric CO2 into our soils. This according to Dr. Ratan Lal of the Ohio State University Carbon Sequestration Center. 30% of our CO2 emissions can be sunk into the soil. Peri-urban land also offers ecosystem services to the towns and cities around it. Groundwater recharge, biodiversity protection, flood mitigation, it cools the city and towns. The local production for local consumption insulates us from climate change events, pandemics, financial shocks, fuel shocks. I mean, we've gone through this whole. We've seen the vulnerability of the supermarket food supply chain. It was tested under drought and was again tested under pandemic. We have to think about how do we source a lot of food locally. And progressive cities like Melbourne, Australia, Rosario, Argentina, Belo Horizonte in Brazil, they're all grappling with this issue, right? And we decided we have to struggle with our own government. I'm not even talking about the national government here, I'm talking about the provincial government to make them understand that it's very important for us to learn from theirs and protect our peri-urban land. So here I want to make 4 recommendations, a call to action. 1, include local production in spatial planning. That's very important. That's a blind spot. Prioritize the protection of peri-urban agricultural land with new land use category, land for primary food production. I mean, in Stellenbosch, it's surrounded by agricultural land, but 80% of the vegetables get imported here from somewhere else because it's agricultural land. It's not primary agricultural. Land use is important. And prioritize policy and resources towards small-scale farmers and regenerative farming. Reverse apartheid spatial planning by integrating social housing with densification policies of cities and towns. 5, industrialize the economy. The late Stellenbosch University economist Sabine de Blanche noted that in South Africa, manufacturing dropped from 22% in the 1990s to 11% in the 2000s. All these people had jobs in factories producing our goods and services. Now it's important. And he said, let's not copy the Americans, right? And we're doing that all the time. And then the 6 is stop deadly urban sprawl, provide small-scale farmers with incentives, and support when they work to rehabilitate the environment. So about myself, you see there's a little map of where I'm located. So I work with an amazing PHA campaign team, and our work is to protect the 3,000-hectare peri-urban Philippine horticulture area against developments. You see on the side there all the challenges that we're facing with developments, and protect the city's food and climate resilience. And we also engage in protecting the aquifer in our soil, which can supply the city with up to 30% of its potable water. And I work with my team on the farm to kind of reimagine land reform, small-scale farming, and our relationship with the soil. And so we involved in collective learning, upskilling farm workers who are unemployed to become farmers. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
All right, so I think we have 2 more.
Yes.
Ma'am, you go first, and then Mr. Mukanji will go right after. Okay, so I think my approach to land is going to be slightly different. I own a piece of land in Stellenbosch that we acquired through land reform and rural development. It was a 9-acre piece of land, a barren piece of land that we had developed into a wine farm. Now, at the stage, I had to make for a full year presentations to the government to make them believe and understand that I can be a farmer. I did not want to be a farmer. I wanted to play in the space of wine tourism in Stellenbosch. And so far, we are the only 100% women-owned wine farm in the Stellenbosch or even the Western Cape. And I want to know, why is it so difficult for women in the wine industry to get hold of land? Why is there so little interest of government in the Western Cape? Who is keeping the government responsible or accountable for failing us? And why are we have such a huge, looking at the Stellenbosch University and the law faculty and systems, why is there not a group of people that approach the government and start looking at what and where is going wrong? They earn huge amounts of money, which they should not be earning because they are not doing good to their people. In the wine industry where I come from, the land reform program included equity shareholding. And I was part of the committee. And Minister Mkhonto was very good in including grassroots people in his decision making. But one thing that I highlighted was that maybe these people worked on farms for very long, but would they know what to do with their stock beyond the farm gate? Do they have business skills to be able to make the business work? And that is a lack of that made black people in South Africa look very bad because they did not have the knowledge to do business. So I'm a wine entrepreneur. I started with a product, the same way my sister started with the product. And it meant that we had to buy in the wine from an established winery, labeled it, and take it to the market. South Africa was, and is still absolutely close to stock our wines in retail grocery stores. And our first markets were overseas in America, built huge markets in America, and still they don't recognize us because we are black people that were non-existent in the wine industry post-apartheid, so we should not be playing this space. Why is government still, hoekom lewer hulle ons nog steeds uit aan colonialism in these spaces? Because they are not taking control and they are not really doing a good look, taking a good look at what is happening. They are in fact quiet about it. Then the other part of land restitution. What I wanted to say also was about the farm workers. And the farm workers that has been the slaves of working on the land for 365 years. But yet they are not benefiting from the humongous wealth that the wine industry has created over this time period. So we're sitting with farmer communities that are still impoverished. Their children have to travel long kilometers to school. They don't have access to technology, but they still have to do the same work to stay on top of their education in the same way the town children used to. When we were during COVID, these people did not receive food parcels. They were poor as poorer, and they told me if I asked them, do you have food, they would say, we have flour, we have coffee. But the government was not held responsible for stealing the food from these poor people. And I have a big problem with the way government is running this country. Coming back to the restitution, my aunt was part of waiting for 16 years for a house to be allocated in Paternoster that the government bought, but the red tape in the office would not allow them to let my aunt have her house that my grandma lived in for 50 years and she lived in for 22 years. And these people, when they were two sisters, 70 years old, they lived in somebody's backyard for 16 years in a Wendy house. But there was no accountability of what was happening in the offices of these restitution, rural development and land reform offices. So what are they going to make better in executing what you're sitting with at the moment? Is to hold people accountable and give them a certain amount of work that needs to be finished at a certain time frame. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. and Mrs. Kleinhaus.
Mrs. Kleinhaus.
Mrs. Kleinhaus. Okay, Mr. McCungy, you can go. But before, just a thought so you can think about, because after Mr. McCungy, that's when we're going to have our discussion. The thought to think about, I don't like to defend government, but who's actually at fault? Is it the private sector or is it government? Because you say government isn't doing something. However, Mr. Kosa will testify, we've sat down as a foundation with the Minister of Public Works, who has said to us, there's land that she's going to give to the community, either for farming or whatever you want to do with it, owned by the state. All she wants to know is, do you have a plan for this land? And if you do, I will give it to you. So maybe it's a communication issue, not necessarily that government is sitting back. She came here to Stellenbosch and spoke down, not with the CEOs of major wine farms, but with members of the community and said, land exists, and I will give it to you. She showed us, she plotted it out and said, pick.
In Stellenbosch.
Here in Stellenbosch. So I'm saying,
sorry, municipal land.
State-owned land. So that's another thing, it's a legal thing. So there's land that is owned by Stellenbosch municipality, but then there's land that is owned by national government. So when we say government as a whole, we must understand national government under Patricia de Lille says there's land that she wants to give to the communities to do with what they want. As long as you have a project plan, business plan to say this is what we're going to do. So I'm saying, in defense of government, we must understand what do we want from government. So maybe there's a communication breakdown that we aren't communicating, we don't know how to. But that's something for us to think about. Is it the state or is it the private sector? Because right now we're at a place that is owned by one man, Mr. Tony, who's very generous about his land. However, he bought this place from Anglo. The idea that this one huge piece of land, the issue is Kaimagi, for instance. It's 10% the size of this piece of land, but it's got 60,000 people living here. Whereas here, no one lives here. This is just open land. So is it the state or is it the private sector? So I think this is something we should all consider for our discussion. Who is at fault? So, thank you.
And Patricia is coming on the 28th of October.
Again, so we'll definitely invite you to be part of this conversation because government is willing to work.
Okay, thank you. I hope I make sense with this, and as a tongue-in-cheek, because we kept getting these messages to say, give your explanation of restitution, and as we know and as we've heard, the whole notion of restitution is so problematic anyway. We haven't quite understood some of it. But as a little aside, do you know that slave owners who were British were given reparations and money back when slavery was abolished in the UK? They were paid money for the loss of their slaves. Right? So there's all the stuff that we can do, but in fact, sometimes who benefits from the monies that go out? Anyway, so, and I like Gramsci, so I just thought I'd just throw in a bit of Gramsci there. And this is quite important because we had people saying, they're so disillusioned, etc., etc. But we must always have hope. Hope is quite critical for us. Okay, and then trust. One of the problems is that we have a problem about how much of trust there is. And this is what the issue is at the moment. Younger people have less trust in institutions of society. And we see it all the time. Right? For various reasons, but we see it all the time. You and I might have trust in the way the law works, or where this institution works, or government at various levels work. But younger people are losing confidence in government. That's a lack of trust. And you'll see why I'm saying this. So, what do we have in our this is the Eastern Cape. I come from the Eastern Cape, and so this is my stamping ground as such. Former Bantustans are worse off 20 plus years after 94. They're worse off. They haven't improved. We've got various indicators. This is the economic indicator, gross value added, and GDP. We see it in the development index, number of people in poverty. And Advocate Tobacco, who for some reason didn't make it, he wrote very interesting books on land, and he illustrates some of these issues with the stories that he's found. Likewise, service backlogs are much higher there than elsewhere. As you can see, it's like terrible in that part. Okay, now, the area that I really work in terms of this housing issue and with this organization, HAG, is around Nelson Mandela Bay. So I thought some numbers are important because otherwise we're talking in a bit of isolation. So the population is 1.2 million, of which 24,000 households are with that amount of households, but 41% are female. Now, 49% of the population live in poverty. Now, that's the challenge that we have. This is in an urban area, right? 1/3 of households get subsidized services. This is just an accounting entry, but all government documents write it out, even in this city and in Cape Town. 640 million rands. So what happens is that in the IDP, they say this, that we realize our services are unaffordable. We are setting aside 640 million. People will apply to have indigent grants, which is also bloody sin. I'm ashamed that our government does that. But you must register to be indigent, and then you'll get a subsidized services. The big problem is that if we had 10% of that, we could create the industrial stuff that you're talking about. But instead, what happens is government says, oh, well, these people can't afford it, therefore we should subsidize their costs. 640 million, I mean, that's a lot of money. And then 30% of formal households depend on indigent grants. So this is also kind of like a big worry, because now you have a poor population. 45,000 households live in backyards and informal settlements. 50% of households earn less than 3,000 pounds. And the unemployment rate, actually, I was told yesterday that actually the figures are even worse than this, right? 40% unemployment rate post-COVID. And amongst youth, actually, I was told that this is about 70%. So now we have an explosion waiting to happen. And in our country, of about 60 plus million, 32 million people rely on grants. Now that paints quite a dismal picture of what we have to do Okay. And then one of some global things, because it's important that there's a bigger context about homelessness and poverty. So, Sustainable Development Goal, right to adequate housing and land, but 1.6 billion people currently live in substandard housing globally. Now, the global population is about 6.5 billion people. That's a lot of people. Right? 100 million people are homeless, totally homeless. Developing countries, people living in slums, 828 million. Right? So now you see that this is like scary stuff. And the challenge is not just ours, it's a global challenge. So what do we do now as an organization, given all of this stuff? Right? We have a three sort of approach. We do human settlement research, try to understand the numbers, what it means. Right? We have a program in environment and greening because we see that the integratedness of that. Right? And we practically run law clinics to build cases of advocacy, to build case studies, to take on government. So we've done all of this kind of stuff and thank God for GAG, which we learned a lot from in our interactions with GAG. And so what we found was that illegal occupations, what we call tenure-related problems, this is how we try to address this. The legal owner remains a shack dweller, while someone who doesn't qualify kind of invades the house and occupies it. That's happened. Land invasions, where informal settlements just are set up for various reasons. A lot of pressure in urban areas, and people just come in and settle wherever they are. Right? Title deeds. So Nelson Mandela Bay, the city council, says, well, we can't deliver title deeds because the roads don't have names. They don't have names. Who's responsible for name roads? The very city council. So there's a backlog in just delivering title deeds. So people are in their houses, which they have total full right to, and they don't have that piece of paper which they can do anything with. And then there's no accountability from stakeholders. I mean, government is kind of like shrugs itself, etc. Construction related, very low community participation in these housing projects. And then there's poor construction. We've done some work and it shows that a few thousand RDP houses need to be condemned and rebuilt. So you're paying twice for one house, which is a really shitty house. And then, of course, there's vandalism of houses. Living conditions related, infrastructure is bad. So houses get plonked in places, very little supporting infrastructure, vegetation, greening is lacking, waste management problems. Cities don't collect waste, especially in what I would call township areas, which is also a misnomer. The fact that we still, so many years later, call them townships rather than suburbs is an indicator. And just by the way, for instance, Dansane, there's a project where we're working in there, and it's referred to as NU18. Now, NU stands for native unit, and they still call it that. It's still officially called it. So we've lost the kind of the real democratic plot. And then issues of home maintenance and community centers, very few of them. As a consequence of there's market weaknesses, etc., inadequate. I'm not going to go into all the detail of that. Sorry. Something else happened there. Okay, so what we do. So that gives you the broad, scary scale. So what we've done is, and I kept hearing people talk about, oh, how can the university get involved with this? We approach the university, we as an organization, to say, let us work with your law students, those who are candidate attorneys, and we want to run legal clinics, but not here at the university campus, where people live. Right? So we take the service to people there. Right? Now that requires a bit of persuasion, but that's what you do. The NGOs, that's what we do. We've got a gift of the gab, we kind of like go there and we harass them. So we work with the law department, the law faculty, to bring candidate attorneys in, right? To allow their lecturers and their professors to come in, so that you had a candidate attorney might take an affidavit, but supervised properly. We arrange a community hall, we get partitions, we put a network in place, so people would leave with a will, signed, witnessed properly, hard copy, one copy left in the law clinic, at the University Law Clinic. The other, that individual will take back. We did law, wills, we did land, title deed issues, etc. Because in fact, the problem is also that people spend enormous amounts of money to go to a place from wherever they live. In some cases, 50, 100 bucks a time. That's a lot of money. Right? So you rather have the services there. It's a simple thing to do. And it takes some support from the law department itself. Now here we have the social justice chair who could, she's got a lot of influence, she can drive. Take the clinic to the people. We're also working on now on with built environment students at the university to do the same thing, to look at housing defects. Because what we want to do with all of these things is to build case studies and be able to make case law precedents. Go to court to say, do not give these people contracts to do this. They're shoddy building, we've got 100,000 cases, etc. Because we have to do that. We did want to march in the streets, but in fact, we found that a technical approach and treating poor people professionally has more weight. People can march, we can march in the streets too, but we have to approach it technically too. We've had greening campaigns. So in these areas, what we've done is that when we've supported people in an area, we also do a tree planting, fruit tree planting on the pavements. Not in privatized households, as small as those households are, but on the pavements. So you change the nature of how people see assets in their area. And we've also trained a whole lot of what we call local development facilitators. We've trained them in all the subsidies that occur. One of our colleagues is the national coordinator of the Street Law Project in South Africa. So she had an entire program of how to train people who knew nothing about the law, but how to make it understandable, how they could use it, etc., etc. So that helps a lot because these are your flag wavers champions in townships and areas. And we, as I said, we're building up case studies as well as policy positions, access to land, because it comes down to access to land. And we've supported, and this is such a tiny number. I was a bit embarrassed to put it here. We supported over 500 people in doing these legal things. It's small, but we are dependent on. It costs us 45,000 rands per clinic to run.
Per clinic.
Yeah, per clinic. That would be making sure that people had arrived, people going with loud hailers, allowing people to come in, sometimes going and fetching people sometimes. These trainers would advise us, no, there's someone there in the wheelchair, we've got to make a plan to get them in, etc. Hire partitions, put a network up, etc. It adds up, costs add up. Fortunately, we've got free services from the university, free services from lawyers, but as part of their code, they need to offer a certain number of pro bono hours. So we like capitalize on that. You have to do that. You have to try treat them every way you can. Okay, so now that's what we've done. But what's the issue? And Professor Madonsela said, how do you think restitution? That's what we do. It's what I would call administrative justice in real terms. But what's to be done? I mean, we've got to think big. We're not thinking big with innovation. We're thinking very small about it. And I know some people won't like this, but we've got to transcend this post-apartheid legacy. That's important to understand, but we're moving to the future. We're moving to the future. We must understand the past to plan in the present for the future. Otherwise, we have all the hang-ups about this, that, and the other. And we must have government support for technical innovation. We don't. We had the electric car. Our Department of Science and Technology messed it up totally. We lost the moment.
That was 10 years ago.
Eh?
It was 10 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. We lost the moment. And then we have to grow the economy. And hard work. Thomas Edison said something about 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. As you know, you have to work damn hard on your problem. It's not coming easy. You have to work hard. And we must take risks. So often, government officials don't take risks. They'll quote you, oh, the PFMA says, no, we can't do this or that or the other. Where's the risk? You're not taking risks, so then everyone becomes risk averse, and so we don't make a move. We're scared to make a move. And I think we need leadership. One of our problems is that we don't have determined, preferable leadership. And I'm not going to read all of this stuff. But we need leaders who can take people from their comfort zones. And what we have is, people think leadership is, oh, we've got KPIs, and that's fine. That's not leadership. That's just management. Okay, and then when we look at housing, I just wanted to say this last bit, and I picked this up from these people here. Social housing should insulate people from market forces, promote social equality, and enable residents to exercise democratic control over their housing. Now, we don't always have that. In fact, we hardly have that. So, we've got to decommodify housing. We've got to have social equality. And this is my last slide. We've got to have resident control. Without that, actually, we're just playing around. We'll have matchbox houses everywhere. And if they sold us, I'll stop.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right, so we have 15 minutes until we have to go back inside. And I think it's great that Mr. Makanji went last. Mother will not forgive me. If we come back to the whole theme of this conference is restitution. All of us know how to identify the problems. We know what's going wrong. We all know very well. But the question is, what do we think we should be doing about it? And here, we must come with a solution. Based on what we've had as presentations, what do we think can be done? And I want to start with a short story. Every time I fly, I love town planning. But the crazy thing about Cape Town and Johannesburg is that from 30,000 feet, if I look down, I can always tell you who lives where. I can tell you exactly what the people look like, how much they earn, from 30,000 feet. And that's not by accident. We call the apartheid architecture guys, he's called the architect of apartheid because it was well planned. Nothing happened by accident. It was a very well planned. He was a sociologist. Now, in order to deconstruct that, that means we must have a plan. It's not going to unbundle itself. So that's what we're here for. What does restitution look like? Particularly when it comes to the issue of land. What should it be the private sector? There's a problem with the government. What's our plan? So based on the presentations we've had, I'd like to hear what thoughts do you guys have? What should restitution look like? Should Anglo-America pay tax, extra tax, and bring that money back to what we call the townships? Should Big Pharma do that? What do we think? And so, based on the different presentations we've had, I'd love to hear the comments on this. What do we think restitution looks like? Is it a government thing? Is it a private sector? If the speakers, whoever wants to go first, please.
I want to take issue with you about the government has land.
Government has land. They don't even know how much land they have. They have an audit where they do not know how much land they have.
I was a born cattle farmer. In 1995, I immigrated to Australia and lived there for 16 years. In that time, I was invited to meet one of the parliamentarians who introduced me as a cattle farmer, and he says, I need to come back. I said, come back to what? He said, you've got hectares and hectares of land lying fallow, not being used. So I said, well, that's cheap. What's your plan? No, we don't have a plan. But we're looking for black farmers. So you qualify as black, come back and we give you the land and you can do whatever. But train the people. I said, I don't mind. But you have a resource. Farmers are not made overnight. They're made in generations. So you have a wide resource here. Why don't you work with them to transfer skills?
I would say the government is willing to do that.
Why?
But they don't have you say they don't have a
They
plan.
don't have a plan.
if we understand that that's the thing about restitution, will we present him with a plan? Ben Turok writes in his book that in '94, he was told we need a national development plan, we need an economic plan, and he was told on Friday night that it has to be presented on Monday. And in his book, he talks about, I didn't know what to do. So he sat down with a whole bunch of things. Aziz Fahad and Ben Turok, Aziz Fahad, and Emmanuel. They put something together in week. But that was them. They didn't have a plan, but you have a plan now. Should we not present it to government?
I had a friend there.
Is the channel?
His reply to me was, don't use the word white. We will eat sand if we have to. That is now cutting your nose to spite your face.
All right, so then we know that the issue here is the way we communicate. So we don't necessarily have to make it white, but how are we going to solve the problem? They don't call it white
I'll
farmers.
fast forward. I came back to South Africa 11 years ago, thinking that I would make a difference. I go to Stellenbosch, Department of Agriculture. I sit with the woman for 1 hour, tell her who I am. She says, yes, we'll put you on the list, it'll take you 5 years. For land that is available, we'll put you on the list, and I can tell you now it's going to take 5 years. And if we give you the land, you must have a white farmer as your mentor, and there must be no blacks on the farm. There must be no blacks living on the farm, because if you go under, we can't sell the farm and get our money back because there are blacks living there. I said, are you listening to yourself?
Okay, so we understand that that's a policy issue, so that's one of the things that we need to address. What type of policies should we be advising government to change? So you've identified a problem, but here for restitution-wise, what are our solutions to the problems you've identified?
And then also,
When we sit with government, what must we say to them? When we sit with, no, but you're identifying problems.
Yeah.
And I did say,
No, but
guys,
you-
we all know the problems. They're terrible.
With
The question
with
is,
all
what's our
respect,
plan?
no, but with all respect, you're simplifying a
Mm.
very
You're
serious
oversimplifying.
systemic issues that we've inherited, and there are no quick fixes to it. We've outlined a whole set of things today people have spoken about, of where intellectual focus needs to come, where energy and so on. And I was at the Presidential Climate Commission a few months ago. Everybody in the world can tell you about the need for support small-scale farmers as part of the food security problems we're facing now, and we will face with intensity. There's a simple logic to it.
Yes.
So you're telling me, no, this is the problem where we just haven't communicated. It's a communication problem. It's not a communication problem. It's a question of vested interest in our economy and how those are protected and how our government line up and side up and align it and how can we begin to break it. I think it's the question. That's the question we need to start posing.
I'm just wondering, we've got 10 minutes,
Yeah.
and maybe we should just get a few responses
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
people first. I mean, we've heard from yourself, which was interesting, but I think it'd be nice to get a few more ideas and response to some of the presentation.
You go, and then Mr. Cook. Let's go, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, thank you so much. I think you're right. The land issues are very, very complex. It's not doing any justice to the conversation to have this time today. That's the first thing that I want to say. This conversation we should have had early in the morning when everybody was fresh around the table, because a lot of people have left also. And it is such an important conversation to have that we cannot, have it while we hush. We now have to rush because people are waiting. Secondly, I really think that the problems that we are having have been built over years, and we're now at a point where it's almost unmanageable. These problems have become unmanageable for government. The number of land claims that needs to go through, people are going to die without seeing justice, without experiencing going back to that piece of land where they grew up and where their childhood memories are, and that has destroyed them, and, you know, it was a traumatic experience and it had a traumatic impact for the rest of their life. We not, there are millions of people probably that's going to go through that process. And we are going to see the impact on the next generation. People who feel that justice has not been done. And God forbid, take justice into their own hands. But that is the root that I see that we are going
But that's not already happening in KwaZulu-Natal.
it does, it does. I say we have to look, and it comes back to the question that you are asking, what can we do to more innovative ideas to look at land? How can we use land beyond just agricultural purposes? Solar energy, wind energy, those kind of things are maybe. But I think we also have to look at the entire value chain of agriculture. Agriculture is not only about growing products, it's also adding value to a product. For instance, in the wine industry, you grow the grape, but then you work the grape into a product, and that product is a wine. That product, to work it into a wine, you need a cellar, and to put that wine into a bottle, you need a bottling plant. So land can be used beyond just for planting. It can be used for industrialization. It can be used for warehousing. It can certainly be used for other, for infrastructure development other than just agricultural land.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to cut you off. So land,
Last
we need a plan.
point, last point that I have to make. The fact that she's sitting here and she is raising a point specifically around women and women's issues when it comes to land, I don't think we should just disregard it and say it's because we don't know who to speak to or government. We have been in the industry for 20 years. We have been, I mean, there's no department that we didn't speak to. It is a incapacity, or not an incapacity, it is an injustice from the department. They have all these policies, but when it comes to action and what they're actually supposed to do, they don't give.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean,
So we
you know, 67,000 land claims
No,
not
no,
settled.
627, not 6,000.
627,000.
No, no, estimate,
Hmm.
6,000 or 7,000, not
Yeah.
67,000.
Oh, I see.
It's
67,000.
not a lot if
Kind
you're
of
settling 400 a year.
incapacitating the state. I mean, our state needs to recapacitate itself. We need socialist-style Marshall plans that are propaganda campaigns that media people like ourselves can execute. You know, where people get motivated. There's no motivation in our government. We need to have billboards up like they used to have in the Soviet Union and in China that I saw when I went to Vietnam in 1990, where we say to people, these are the government's targets and these are the deliverables we need. We can put 500 graduates into a building and give them each a whole bunch of land claims, all the paperwork, and say each of you deliver us 10 land claims a month. Thank you very much. We can count our population, and I see the census people going around, and that's well organized. And in a month or two, they count every person in South Africa, but not all the foreigners, unfortunately. But,
To
we
100,000
can
land
do that.
claims.
You know what I mean? It's,
I want to give everyone an opportunity, but there were hands up. So Mr. Costa, then Makanji, and then we can have a royal rumble in the last minute or so. Mr. Costa.
Thank you for the opportunity. Over 64 million hectares is in the hands of white people as we speak currently. And there is bulk of other millions of hectares that are in the hands of the government. So government is busy trying to release that land. So that's what Wanti was, I think, alluding to when he was saying that we are presenting something, a proposal application for the land that has been identified. So we are in that process. I think basically what we're wanting to put on the table is an invitation for people to partner with that process so that we can test the waters, whether government is willing to release land for the kind of developments that we need to see that speaks exactly to the kind of diversity of ideas and land uses that you are talking about. Because we're talking about the residential component of the land, the business, food security as far as agriculture is concerned, and also education, health, sports and recreation, innovative ideas of how do you harness the sustainable energy systems, such as your solar panels and also your wind turbines. And in the process, you celebrate the cultural diversity that we all have as a something that we can, I think, use to reclaim and restore the human dignity that has been lost as a result of all the inheritances of our colonial slavery and also the apartheid system, as well as the corruption that we have currently in our governance system. So I think if we put something tangible and we join forces working together, because I think there is a psychological kind of hatch that is still embedded in our minds. And the suspicions and the deficit of trust that he was talking about, we don't trust each other as communities as well. As people who need assistance, we lack that kind of willingness to work with one another and begin to build a very dynamic kind of force that can make government to, I think, move faster than they can and do at the present moment.
Mr. Makanji?
Okay, so I'll be brief. I mean, our current issues with land, they're not ahistorical. There's a long history to it, especially our government has supported it. So, for instance, under apartheid, white commercial farmers got interest rate benefits, subsidies on fuel, rail, and fertilizer, state grants. I'm reading from some work I did some time ago. State grants for irrigation and soil conservation, and measures to support and stabilize prices with control boards, air control boards, etc., etc. And then measures to restrict imports. So that's what happened. In 94, through trade liberalization, the people who came to advise Bain and McKinsey came to advise the national government at that time, incoming government. They said, no, kill all of those things because we're moving to a liberal world, etc. So what happened was we had trade liberalization, sector deregulation, very important stuff, right? No more guaranteed prices, etc. Right? Just at the time when we are at the beginning of our democratic dispensation, where more people were hoping to benefit from our democracy. So because these things don't happen in isolation, but this is the important one. So that Department at that time of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, 15 billion that they had, they gave 5 billion to land reform and a measly 1.3 billion to small-scale farmer support. Now this illustrates the problem that you guys have been expressing. Right? Now, as a result, state support, according to the OECD, John Sender and Phil Black have written a lot about it, economists and ag economists too. Agriculture support in South Africa for small-scale farmers is the lowest in the OECD countries. Okay. So that's the challenge. Now, for me, the policy thing is very straightforward because we have emotions about land, but in fact, to approach it technically again, to say, change your budget allocations. Policy. Right. That's a positive thing. Then you force them to change it. Because you go to any city, I mean, you go to Spotify and they'll say, agriculture is a key part of our thing. When I look at the budget, you'll see, how about you give you 0.5% of your budget to
it only brings in 2.3% of our GDP, which it shouldn't. Compared to Holland, we should be doing so much better. Prof. Walker?
I don't think I agree with you. You can't really do justice to this. I just want to make a small correction because my understanding is that the subsidies actually, I agree with you about we need more support, absolutely. But in fact, the subsidies for farmers started in the 80s to cut that because of the financial pressures that the apartheid sector is under. So we also need to understand our history more in a more refined way when you're thinking in terms of policy and then for that. So that's just there's enough. We talk in large. We make large claims which we need to unpack a bit more when we're coming to the point of policy development. It's easy to say, and I was argued for, the support for restitution, etc., has been too small, but you have the same claims coming from the housing sector, you have the same claims coming, we've got it, how are we looking at the budget and what to be allocated priorities? And these are challenging. But we haven't, I don't think communication with our current, not talking about the state, I'm talking about the government. We need to look at the problems. We seem to separate the government and the state and think about the serious problems we have with our current government. And we need to think about how can we shift that. And that's a separate conversation.
I have a question for that.
I think about restitution.
Yes.
The people on the N2, Kanmandi, Kalicha, wherever, need restitution from our government to restore their dignity. But let us design a community like Valdevie in a lower
Socioeconomic.
with centers where there are shops and things that they can work at in employment. Start restoring those kind of things.
Sitting next to a man whose actual business is exactly
Please,
that.
I would like to be part of
My
something.
question to consider though is, when it comes to restitution, we're saying government is responsible for restitution. What about De Beers? What about Anglo America?
We can't reach them.
Can't take that to account.
That's my question. The thing about
Why?
There's a wealth tax.
there's a wealth tax. I was just going to raise that.
Yeah.
I mean, the wealth tax was killed by the ANC government, right?
So
Okay, so that's the one thing. To how to raise money to meet the budget requirements for housing, for agriculture, for small-scale farmers, for restoring the environment, etc. Okay, so that's one thing we need. We need to have a wealth tax that these corporations need to put money in the pool. But then we also need, in the housing sector, we have well-located land that these quote-unquote townships sit in. How about we restore those townships into suburbs, into living spaces instead of townships? I mean, in the 90s, there was an interesting paper done by a housing unit out in KwaZulu-Natal, and it made so much sense to me. We had a housing plan to build housing communities, not the housing units, right? But it was all ignored, right? It's all ignored. So we need to restore our township into suburbs, right? And then the other thing we need to do is in terms of food production, right? Because you can't have a house and you can't put food in the kitchen of that house. So we need to understand that we need to develop a spatial, we need to include food production in the spatial planning of that
All of it.
of that town, of that city. We need that. Yeah. And then what somebody said, we have to industrialize.
We do.
We have to industrialize, right? We've lost our industrial capacity by 50% over the last 30 years. Now we are all importing stuff, and we could be getting people gainfully employed by producing the things that we need as a country, as a community.
I do agree with you.
I have similar recommendations.
I do agree with you, but things like industrialization is not about, it's not speaking to the theme of restitution.
It does.
Because that's,
It does. I tell you how. I tell you how. Because it restitutes people to a dignified job. It restitutes people to a dignified job. That's what it does.
I understand, and it's a question of productivity, raising the
The government
productivity of
needs
the
to
society.
earn less money.
You talk about
And that
big
money needs
corporation.
to put into things that can help.
I have one quick question before you close for us to think about. I think maybe it's because I come from a different generation. I was born in the late 80s. So some of my issues are very different to some of the world you've experienced. In my mind, I'm not a socialist or a communist, but in my mind, it makes no sense that a single human being can own the land we're standing on right now, when there are communities with tens of thousands of people live in squatter camps.
My brother, it's also in our generation, we should feel the
But
same
now,
way.
when we talk about restitution, you say the government can't do anything. I imagine a world where the government can say, well, when Nazi soldiers stole artworks from the Jews, even today, decades later, families are going to them saying, listen, we want our painting back.
Yeah.
And they are paying it back. So the fact that someone owns this and they say, I went through all of the legal systems, I bought this land legitimately, it's like, you shouldn't have been able to buy all of this. So in my mind, restitution means, surely someone must say, listen, Anglo-America, we get that you did it all well, but we're gonna take half of your farm.
So you see, that comes to a point that I
You
really
can't
raise,
please do that.
and I want to raise that.
Could you
Is that
please
land?
get on and do that? Because.
I work for an
really, that's
NGO, I
what-
can't do it, but we could if we have a plan.
The youth, it's not our job anymore.
Yeah.
You guys
Yes.
have got to come up with something original, and I wonder how much opportunity there is. You've got the Presidential Climate Change Commission, they've put out a just transition framework. That just transition framework is just the struggle 2.0 without the politics.
Yeah.
So why can't we then use public-private partnerships, or put it all on private if government is so used to it. Put it all on private, that you guys have to generate a country that is going to survive for the next generation. So instead of thinking backwards in restitution terms,
Yeah.
we should be thinking
Forward.
forward in terms of
Exactly.
resilience. Let's quit the past and let's quit all the weight that goes with things like resilience.
And I want to say something on that.
Resilience.
Because you see, what we have done is we have taken constitution as a profit transaction.
Let's get the
Right.
fine to South Africa.
We need to
and
move
then our-
beyond that.
our country.
So that the restitution has a benefit for the entire community, not only that person or a community who will be restituted the land for.
There we agree. That's where we agree.
Broader
I hope we have that.
Well, no, I mean, that's why I said yesterday, you cannot talk about restitution without talking about the redistribution of land and also land reform, and the three cannot be divorced.
But there has to be a future plan. I mean, a friend of mine, his family